Good morning, distinguished guest speaker, participants, colleagues, and friends. We welcome to the fifth day of Faculty Development Program on Communication Skills, Theory and Practices, organized by the Department of Languages, Integral University. I'm so pleased to see many colleagues, professors, and friends from many states of India and across the world. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously help us make this event come together to become a grand success. You have all been chosen to be a part of our association due to a mutual passion for updating the knowledge and understanding. Thank you for all the appreciation that we are receiving from your side, either in chat box or through email. Today's session is focusing on effective communication in the academic publishing process, maximizing your chances of success. It will unfold new ideas, perspective leading towards the academic publishing process. In order to gear up new energy to our program, today we have with us our key speaker, Professor Dr. David Sheehan. He is one of the renowned academicians of the world. Telling about him is like showing a lamp to the sun. But according to the tradition, I would like to put some words in front of you to welcome our guest. So, going in brief through the CV of Dr. Sheehan, I would share with you. He was born in Cork, Ireland in 1958 and took first class honours BSc in biochemistry at University College Cork, UCC in 1980. He did PhD in 1985 from Trinity College Dublin and DSc in 2009. For published work, National University of Ireland between 2013-2016, he was the head of School of Biochemistry and Cell Biology, UCC. From 2017 till present, he is the interim Dean and Professor of Biochemistry, College of Arts and Sciences, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, Abu Dhabi, UAE. He is the member of American Chemical Society and British Biophysical Society. He is the editor of Toxins, Drug Testing and Analysis. Professor Sheehan has published 4 books, including 2 editions of textbook Physical Biochemistry, Principle and Applications, Ville 2009-2000. 142 peer-reviewed publications, approx 6,000 citation. H index is equal to 30 WS and Scopus 45 GS. He supervised 18 PhD and externally examined 25th PhD across Europe and Asia. He reviewed grant of NSF USA, BBSRC and MRC UK, ANR France and NW Netherlands. Professor Sheehan is listed in the recent ranking of top 2% of career citation by Stanford University. This is the brief intro. Now we are honored to invite Professor David as a guest speaker. Please, the screen is all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Arena. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to open up my presentation here now. Okay, it's great to have the opportunity to present to you today. What I'm going to try and do is take you through some of the mysteries of academic publication, and I'm going to try and give you just advice, tips really, on ways in which you can improve your success. Everybody, I would say, every academic gets frustrated by academic publication at some points in their lives, including me. But nonetheless, we can't escape the necessity of doing academic publication. So I'm going to try and give you some ideas about how you can do things to take more control of the process and, as I say, over time, build up your success rate. I'm not kind of representing any higher academy or anything. The tips and the advice I'm going to give you are just very much from my perspective, based on my experience. I published my first paper when I was a final year undergraduate student, and you know, it took me a long time to understand how the process actually works in reality. and to build success. So I'm trying to kind of save you having to spend decades and decades like I did learning this stuff. So that's kind of my intro. You've heard about my biography, so I won't go into that. So this is an outline of what I want to do in this talk. Firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about the history and importance of academic publication. The internet changed academic publication in many, many ways. So we'll look at the steps in the publication process, the importance of publication to an academic career, and I'll introduce you to the concept of the publication pipeline. And then the question is where to publish and where not to publish, and how to get published, my tips. And this is very much my personal advice. So I'm going to, most of what I'm going to say is relevant to peer-reviewed papers, but much of it would also be relevant to book chapters, and at the end of the talk, I want to actually go through a book proposal to kind of give you an idea how you put together a book proposal for a publisher. So that, and I know for humanities, of course, for humanities type research, that is probably where everyone wants to get to at some point in their career. Academic publication communicates research to the international academic community. The invention of printing revolutionized communication of scholarship.
Sorry, I'm just cutting you short. Your presentation is not visible here on the screen. Are you
Oh.
sharing it?
I am, yeah. I have the stop sharing button in blue.
No, don't.
It says it is sharing a window.
Sir, your PPT is visible on your screen?
My slide is visible on the screen, yes.
Okay.
And at the bottom it says StreamYard.com is sharing a window.
Okay, I think some network connectivity issues there.
Yeah, probably.
So you have to stop screen and then share it again, sir.
Okay, I'll hit the stop sharing and I'll try do it again then.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry about this to the audience. No. So
you have to come to StreamYard again.
Yeah, share screen.
Yes, sir. Now your presentation is visible.
Now can you see me? Great. Okay. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay, thanks.
It's always a challenge,
sir.
isn't it?
Welcome, sir. No problem, sir. You may start, sir.
Okay, so we'll resume. So academic publication communicates research to the international academic community. An emphasis on international, by the way, because that's what's going to really give you most, career progression and citations. The invention of printing revolutionized communication of scholarship. This publication underlies academic standing. It supports prestige and standing of academic departments and universities, and this feeds into rankings. My university, just in a few weeks ago, when we went up to position, I think it's 187 in the QS rankings. So we finally broke into the top 200. And at a senior level in my university, we take an awful lot of notice of the citation data coming from our faculty, because that's what really gets a university up in the rankings. And this is why your deans, your leadership, your chairs of departments emphasize so much the importance of academic publication. For universities, it's really one of the key items that influences their ranking, and it's one of the few things that you can sort of influence. Now, a publication relies really on peer review. At least the best publication relies on peer review. It's necessary for each step of career progression. Even if you're just doing a PhD, you're expected to publish or to do work of publishable quality. It impacts on appointments and recruitment. It impacts on promotion. As Dean, I have recruited about 60 faculty in the last 2 years into Khalifa University, and I do an awful lot of interviewing, and I review an awful lot of CVs together with my leadership colleagues. And I can tell you, when we're looking at that, the most important part of any CV that we see is going to be the publication achievement. We want to get people who are effective at academic publication. But it also confers objective status on individual academics. And I always tell faculty, if I'm mentoring them or whatever, or advising them, you know, your publication output is your possession. No one can take it away from you. You know, if you go from one university to another university, this is what you bring with you. It's very much a value that you have. And when you go into the job market and you're looking for perhaps a more senior appointment, this is the key item in your CV that people will take a lot of notice of. So that's why I really feel it's something that is very important and should be addressed intentionally. It should be something that you actually actively think about, that you plan, that you make time for, and that you consciously implement. So publication is a key part of the modern academic process. Nowadays, it is heavily electronic and can be searched, compared, analyzed. It is very highly visible. Therefore, it is deserving of consideration and reflection by any practicing academic. In this talk, I want to explore how you can improve the success of publication of your research. Academic publication is a game with many hidden rules, and knowing the rules can improve your success. And what I want to do in this talk is to give you an insight into some of the key rules that I have come across. The internet changed academic publication in many ways, and the publication process has a number of steps in it. But publication originally, certainly when I was doing my PhD, for example, was very manual. You produced typescripts which were typed on typewriters. Images and artwork were all prepared manually. I had to learn how to do photography to produce some of the artwork for my papers. I had to develop film, I had to print film, and so on. Manuscripts were sent by post and then on to referees. Editors' reports were received by post. No means of tracking citations or even searching the literature, except by hand. And in fact, once a month or so, everybody in our research group would sit around the table and we would go through the actual physical journals that had just come in, like literally line by line and page by page, manually. We had no way of doing quick searches for anything. So the world has changed considerably since then. So nowadays, most data are prepared electronically, and electronic submission is the norm. Analysis of submissions for plagiarism can be automatically performed. Citations can be counted, for example, in the Web of Science or Scopus or Google Scholar, and individual or collective performance measured. So this is important because we also sometimes might want to know how good a department is doing. And in my previous job in Ireland, every 2 years I used to have to collect all the kind of publication information from our department of 17 faculty. And this was used to assess how good my department was versus other departments. So it's it's not just about the individual, it's also about the collective. So the key steps in the publication process are preparation of the manuscript, submission of the manuscript, a process called triage, peer review, verdict from the editor, revision of the manuscript. If you're lucky, acceptance, and then correction of proofs, electronic publication, hard copy publication. And one thing I've left off here, which probably should be number 11, is publicizing your success. I strongly advise people to, if you can, and if it's possible under copyright rules, to archive your publications, share them with senior colleagues, send people PDFs of your paper, to try to build your, that's another way that you can help to build your international profile and reputation. So in other words, it's not just about doing the publication, it's also about letting people know that you've done the publication. And I'll give you some ideas on how you can do that later. So this is a kind of a drawing of the peer review process. The drafts should be done ideally, or my advice would be, in conjunction with mentors or colleagues or international friends that you may have. In other words, share the manuscript. Ask people to look at the manuscript. Ask people to read it critically, and don't just be doing this on your own in your office or in your study and hoping that it will be okay. The manuscript that you send to a journal should have been reviewed already by a number of people, ideally. Okay, so that's why I have those kind of those arrows here. Then it's sent to the journal where it undergoes triage. The reason for this is that journals get too many submissions these days, so they can't get them all refereed. So the editor of the journal kind of does a quick look at each manuscript that comes in and decides if it's worthy of refereeing or not. And this is one of the most arbitrary parts of the publication process. Often it would be influenced by, for example, the name of your university. It would be influenced by the perception of you as an academic. Have you published before with that journal, for example? It would be influenced by many things. But so that's one thing we'll talk about in a moment in a little bit more detail, the process of triage. Either the publication is then rejected and sent back to you, or it goes to referees. If it goes to referees, similarly, it can be rejected, or it can be put to revision. So the manuscripts that end up here in this rejection box come back to you. Now, one very important piece of advice I want to give you is that when you get a rejected manuscript, you really have to go back to the start again. Don't be tempted just to send it to another journal as is. Journal editors are very good and very clever at picking up rejects from other journals, and they absolutely hate rejects from other journals. So it's worth taking on board whatever the rejection letter says and starting again and customize the manuscript for another journal. But really, you have to almost go back to the start. You have to apply all the kind of rules and filters that you have applied in the first submission. Meanwhile, the referees will send comments and you can revise the manuscript. In my career, I've only ever had 2 publications that were immediately accepted with no comments, with no changes. Almost everyone has to do revisions of some sort. The referees don't feel they've done any kind of a job unless they find something to revise in the journal. And usually, probably 90% of the time, if you do in fact make the changes that the referees suggest, if you do in fact edit the paper in the light of the referee's comments in a very rigorous way, you will find the paper is accepted. And that's kind of really the success point. And as I say, next step after that is to really sort of publicize to your colleagues internationally that you have published this paper. Okay, now I want to introduce the concept of the publication pipeline. Publication is, in whole or in part, is expected for award of PhD. Quantity, that is the number of papers, and quality, which is usually judged by things like impact factor, citations, H-index, I-10. All of these are just other ways of saying citations, form a key part of hiring decisions. And when we're looking at hiring, we look, are you the first author? Are you the corresponding author? Is there a rational link between your publications, suggesting you're building an independent status as a researcher internationally? This impacts on getting research grants and in career progression. A publication pipeline will have some manuscripts in preparation, perhaps further work is needed, some in review, some in press, some published electronically. And in fact, also, we'll have some manuscripts churning around that have been rejected elsewhere. I have one manuscript that's been rejected about 4 times now, and it's still churning around in my publication pipeline. Publication should be a part of how you do research, not something considered when research is complete. Is your study design sufficiently robust? Is your methodology appropriate? Or are there better methods? Have you got IRB approval if you're working with, for example, students, or you're working with human subjects? Do you need ethical approvals? Q1 journals do not make allowances for practical limitations. So it's no good saying, I couldn't do this because I didn't have the time or something like that. They have a standard and they expect you to meet the standard. Consult the literature even before you start your research to make sure your work will be of comparable quality when completed. Try to identify what your target journal might be. If you are going for open access publication, think about how you're going to fund that, how you're going to actually fund the publication charges, because the open access journals will charge you by the page. So you need to perhaps put that into a research grant if you have a research grant for the work, or you may have to consult with your chair or your dean. Is there funding within the university to cover publication charges? So it's never too late to be thinking about these things. It should not be something, so publication is not an afterthought. That's what I want to tell you here. Publication is something that is continuous. And this is an example of the publication pipeline. Some manuscripts are in preparation, some are undergoing submission, some are in review, some are undergoing revision, and some are in press. The starting up of the pipeline involves sharing ideas with colleagues, discussion, getting them to read drafts critically, allowing you then to edit your submission. When you've publications coming out the other side, then you should perhaps publicize this in blogs, social media. A very good place is ResearchGate, to be a member of ResearchGate, and in some cases you can put your published manuscripts up there as PDFs, and that will improve your citation frequency. Also, you will be asked occasionally for reprints, which nowadays are electronic. And in fact, you should be proactive. You should be sending your newly published paper to people that you admire in the field. This builds your network, and it helps build awareness of what you're doing. And this will make your future publication a little bit easier. So what I want to say about the publication pipeline is it tells you that publication for an academic is a continuous process. It's not a discontinuous process. It's not something that you do sometimes and then you don't do it for a year and then you do it again. It's not that kind of thing. To have success with publication, it's best if you're publishing all of the time, if you're at least involved in publication all of the time. It's like everything else in life. The more you do something, the better you get at it. So you should be thinking of publication as a part of your job, a part of what you do. It's worthy of giving it a share of your time every day, every week, every month. And the publication pipeline is kind of a way of thinking about that. It's a sort of paradigm for thinking about that. And I tell you this because I know that early stage academics, I have a lot of young assistant professors working with me, and I know that they often will kind of work hard on a paper, and then once the paper is accepted eventually, they allow themselves a sort of a gap then to think about the next publication. But in fact, you should be kind of continuously working at this. Where to publish? My advice, go for the top cited journals in your field. There is a resource called SciMaGo. If you Google it, it will take you to the site. And this will tell you for any journal that you type in, how well cited it is. And normally they're divided up into 4 quarters, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So my advice nowadays would be go for Q1 and only very occasionally Q2. Avoid Q3 and Q4. And increasingly, for example, when we're looking at CVs, we will actually look at what the ranking of the journal is in this sense. And certainly in my university, we won't even pay for page charges for our publication charges for Q2, Q3, or Q4. We will only pay for Q1. So we are strongly encouraging our faculty to really pretty exclusively go for Q1. Go for international ISC listed journals. Go for journals that have rigorous peer review. Go for the journals that have the highest impact factor. Aim high. You can always come down. So the message I want to give you here in this slide is be ambitious with your publication plans and have a publication plan. Think about it. Write it down for yourself. Put it up on your blackboard. Put it up over your desk. This is important to your career. It's in fact far more important than, I would say, classroom teaching or service that you give to the university to you as an individual academic. So if it's important, it's worth taking it seriously. And if you are ambitious, you will do better than if you're not. So anyone can start with Q4 journals and sort of go nowhere, you know. But if you start with Q1 and aim high, okay, sometimes you may have to settle for a Q2 journal on occasion, but your aspiration should be Q1. And I know it's harder to do. It's like everything, you know, it's like John F. Kennedy said about going to the moon. We don't want to do this because it's easy. We want to do it because it's hard. If you're doing something hard, you're going to really benefit from it in the end. We're not to publish. Now, this is a little controversial given the audience I'm speaking to now. And I do these kinds of presentations various places in Asia over the years. But I'm just giving you my personal advice. I think you should always go for international journals that have international reputation and acceptance. I would advise any young academic avoid local or national journals, unless you have to, unless there's some reason, there's some specialist reason why you have to perhaps go for a local journal. In general, the balance should be very heavily skewed towards international journals. My advice would be to avoid non-English language journals. Now, there can be kind of exceptions to that. For example, if you're a French scholar or something, then you know, you would be expected to publish in French journals, for example, and perhaps Urdu or whatever. You know, there can be reasons for publishing in local journals, but certainly your kind of ambition should be to make a break into non-English English language journals, because English is the language of the world now. We have many Islamic scholars in my college, and I'm in charge of them. And over the last 4 years, I've been gradually leading them away from publishing exclusively in Arabic, and kind of convincing them to publish also in English. Nowadays they publish a little bit in Arabic and mostly in English. And they've been amazed at how this has improved their international visibility and their success. You know, I think this is, you know, pretty good advice. Avoid predatory journals. So I don't have time to go into the whole kind of predatory story. Just suffice to say that there are companies that are set up just for profit, that run conferences and publish journals that have very little academic merit, very poor, if any, peer review, and they're really only there to make money. And there is a big temptation, and I've seen it all over Asia, there is a big temptation to sort of fill up your publication list with you know, what looks like an impressive list of publications, maybe 20, 30 publications in predatory journals. But believe me, you know, we all know what's going on here. You know, it actually says something very bad about you if you're publishing in predatory journals. Better to have 5 journal articles that are really authentic in competitive international journals, rather than having 50 sort of fake publications in predatory journals. So really avoid anything to do with predatory journals or predatory conferences. And this is a big problem for the academy, actually. It's a growing problem. And I would say avoid anything not peer-reviewed. Peer review should be your kind of gold standard for your publication outputs. Now, of course, there are occasionally some things like perhaps book chapters that may or may not be peer-reviewed, and so on. I'm not saying everything should be peer-reviewed, but peer review should be what you aspire to most often. Because if you're largely publishing, for example, conference abstracts or something like that, then we see through that very easily. So here are my tips before submission, and again, I emphasize these are my personal tips. Okay, there's no they're not the 10 commandments or anything, but they're based on my experience anyway. Think about publication strategy even when designing your study. Even if you're writing up a grant proposal, you should be actually thinking already, where will this end up being published? Set yourself high standards for your data, interpretation, manuscript production. Be tough on yourself. In other words, be your own worst critic. Don't let that manuscript go to the journal until you've really put it through its paces. You may be, tempted to say, well, okay, if it's an experimental paper, I'll do like kind of 3 experiments. Well, it might be better to do 5 experiments. You might fall in love with a particular interpretation of, for example, if you're writing an analysis of a novel or something, you might fall in love with a particular interpretation, but share this with colleagues, and maybe they have a different interpretation. So really be rigorous with yourself and use your network of peers and mentors to help you to come up with a better product. That's what I mean about being tough on yourself. What is your narrative? You should be, as the author of this piece of work, you should know this narrative back to front. And I'm going to introduce you to the second concept now, the elevator pitch, which is a sort of marketing concept from the US. And that's in the next slide. Get colleagues to read drafts of your manuscript before submission. As I go through this talk, every so often I'm going to put network in brackets. And this is one of the key pieces of advice I have for early stage academics, even PhD students. You need a network. You need a supportive network. Try to work at building a network of local and international colleagues, friends, mentors, people you might meet at conferences, for example. But consciously do this, because this network is really a big support to your publication activity. Otherwise, you're just one person plowing a field on your own. Get the English checked, either professionally or by a native speaker. And again, that involves your network. Write simply with short, clear sentences. Use action verbs and avoid jargon. Avoid, as far as possible, technical terms. Of course, sometimes it's unavoidable, but your text should not be. Your text should be transparent. It should read well. And when you have too much jargon, it really makes it kind of opaque to especially non-specialist readers. And editors don't like that. Then you rewrite, and then you rewrite, and then you rewrite. Keep rewriting until the quality has reached a level that you can send to the journal. Ensure all requirements of the journal are met. So, for example, most journals will ask you to number the lines in the manuscript. Obviously, you'll be expected to number the pages, and there could be other special requirements. So, some will have, for example, that images are put as separate files. Some will have them embedded into the text of the manuscript. But really, really look at what the journal's specific requirements are. In general, journals are published by the same same publisher. Like, for example, Elsevier will have a fairly standard kind of set of conventions. So if you're going to an Elsevier journal, you'll have one set of conventions. If you're going to Springer, you'll have a different set of conventions. But really take notice of this, because this is very important for the editor, kind of understanding that this piece of work is targeted at that journal. It's not just something that's being regurgitated and sent to multiple journals. Really think about referees and opposed referees. And one very important piece of advice is when you do a covering letter for your submission, whether or not you're asked for it, supply a list of possible referees. And I'm not saying these should be your friends, or some of them can be people that you hope will give you an easier time, but some of them could be, the top people in the discipline or in the field. One of the editor's hardest jobs is finding sufficient referees, and they spend an awful lot of time looking for referees. So if you have suggested 5 or 6 possible referees, that will actually that can save you a lot of time. That can save the editor a lot of time, and it is one of the ways in which you can influence the peer review process to your benefit. Okay, so this is one of these sort of hidden rules that nobody will tell you about. So always provide a list of potential referees, and with their affiliation and their email address. Identify your target journal. Now, does the paper that you're presenting look like those in that journal? Length, quantity of figures, tables, numbers of references, even down to the font that's used. The paper should look like it belongs in the journal. And the editor, if he sees that this paper looks like it belongs in the journal, would be much more inclined to let it through triage. But if it looks like, no, this maybe is a reject from another journal, it's a hair trigger response. They can just get rid of it. There should be absolutely no typos. And it doesn't matter how many times you have to revise it. It doesn't matter how many friends you have to ask to read it. You should be ensured there's absolutely no typos in the journal. You should cite some papers from the target journal. The thing that editors want most nowadays is they want the papers they're publishing to be cited. So if you're citing papers from the journal that you're targeting, that says to the editor that this paper belongs in that journal to some extent. It also tells them that if this is published, the journal will get a few citations for it. So this is something that's on the editor's radar, but perhaps not on not on the academic's radar usually. So a simple little tip is just cite papers make sure you have some papers at least cited from the target journal. Slavishly follow style and conventions in terms of the text. Again, making sure that it looks like it belongs in that journal. So, for example, there will be a style used for figure legends. There will be a style used for the title of tables, size of tables, and so on. So try to do everything you can to make the paper look like it's already published in that journal. And that's just a little kind of psychological aid to the editor, saying, okay, it looks like it belongs in the journal, and it may then be what will make the difference in terms of getting through triage. Now, this is the elevator pitch. Ideally, your paper should be describable in a few sentences. And really, that's the skeleton of the paper. The elevator pitch is that if you're going from one floor to another floor in a building, that you should be able to tell someone, in this case, what your study is about, in a few sentences, in the time it takes to go from one level of a building to another in the elevator. The title, the abstract, the conclusions should all be consistent with these sentences, and they should always reinforce the same few sentences. On the other hand, if you can't put your study in a few sentences, you'd have to think about that then. You should really think, is this really going to be a coherent study if I can't put it in a few sentences? If you yourself have a few sentences which describe the study, you're well on the way to having a coherent story, a coherent narrative that you can then expand on in the actual manuscript and convince your editor and convince your referees that this is a worthwhile piece of work. If you are convinced by it, that's a start. But if you're not convinced by it yourself, it's very, very hard to convince others. So think about what is the narrative around your study. Now, the submission process. You should carefully review the journal submission process, and every journal will have a website and they will give you great detail on the submission process. Sometimes there will be multiple editors with different research interests and reputations. Identify an editor that you want to target for submission. Have 4, 5, 6 potential referees in mind. This comes back to your network again. The title should be eye-catching. The editor will look very carefully at the title. The title should give an indication of novelty, uniqueness. So it should say things like "for the first time," a novel approach, a novel interpretation. So the title shouldn't be boring. It should be, sexy, eye-catching, jump off the page kind of a title. The abstract must be informative and accurate. The data, if you have data, should be well presented with quality images. And you should decide, do you need tables or graphs? Generally, I would say graphs work better than tables. If you have a lot of data, could it be better included as supplementary material? Most journals nowadays will do this. So you put in separate electronic files and you don't have to clog up your manuscript with too many tables and too many numbers. You must write a persuasive cover letter. Why is this paper needed? And you should know this better than anyone. If you don't know why this paper is needed, it's very hard to convince other people of why it's needed. Novelty, priority, it's a paradigm shift in the field. These are the kinds of phrases you need to have in a cover letter. The editor will often look at the cover letter and look at the title and not much more. So you've got to sort of really get their attention in a positive way. Suggest and identify referees you hope will be supportive. Now, I'm not saying all the suggested referees should be from your network. It's good also to have top people in the field and credible people. Not just, in other words, they should be really genuinely some arm's length referees as well. But one way of just influencing the process a small bit is to include support what people you would regard as being supportive. And allow yourself plenty of time. Don't rush the submission process. This is one of the mistakes I always made early on in my career. I'd come to Friday afternoon and I'd say, okay, I promised myself I'm going to submit this paper now. And I'd get into the website of the journal and I discovered they want to know names of referees, they want a whole load of information, and it became a big rush, kind of completing the template that you have to complete. So give yourself time for the submission part of the process. I would say give yourself a whole day, even if it's a weekend. Give yourself one day to just, in a very sort of paced way, in a very leisurely way, work your way through the submission process and see that what you've done at each step of the submission process emphasizes the quality of the submission and that you have thought about it and that you've been very careful with it. Surviving triage. Journals get more submissions than they can handle, and for this reason they triage the manuscripts they receive, especially nowadays. And let me be honest. I've had a journal article ready. I'm going to submit after this talk, and that was rejected by Nature Communications in triage. They just didn't send it even for refereeing, and that's because they get, I don't know what it is, 95% of the journals of the articles they get, they don't even consider them. So it's just a kind of a function of numbers. So this happens to everybody. Okay. One thing is the novelty of the paper versus what's called Me Too. So Me Too publication is you're just kind of reporting something very similar to what other people have reported in the past. So you're not really adding anything to knowledge. I work a lot in toxicology, and someone says to me, well, I gave these rats copper in their food and they developed cancer. Well, of course they did. That's what I expect. So, copper is a pretty horrible metal. There's no real novelty in that. Okay, so like you should really try to emphasize the novelty. Come at your paper from the perspective of novelty. Make the novelty stand out. They hate chapters lifted out of PhDs. So there is a necessity, if it's you or if it's your student, to rewrite the chapter for publication for the target journal, as I've mentioned earlier. Don't just be tempted just to take a block of text from a PhD thesis and just send that in. They despise rejects from other journals. So if you are resubmitting to another journal, go to the trouble of completely rewriting the manuscript, target it for the new target journal very specifically. They are led by the reputation of the author, departments, or even the university. And this is where your network comes in. Perhaps you could have a co-author from a top-ranking university if you have been lucky enough to get someone like that into your network who will can join you as co-author. And that's one way of really helping to get yourself into the publication game. So be open to that kind of an idea, and use your network to invite people to collaborate with you, and that's one way of helping yourself. Quality and care shown in the manuscript they receive. Care with this supports the idea you are careful in your research. If the manuscript looks careless or sloppy, or any part of the process, the cover letter, your response to referees, anything that looks sloppy or careless, really plants a seed of doubt in the editor and the referee's mind. They begin to think, well, maybe this person was careless with the research as well. So a very carefully presented, professionally managed piece of writing going to a journal helps to convince the referees and the editor that the work was done very carefully and very professionally as well. Okay, it's a kind of subliminal psychological perception. So make sure you can convince them of this by taking great care in the manuscript you end up with. And the question uppermost in the mind of the editor is the paper likely to be cited? So you need to really, in your cover letter especially, emphasize that, for example, this paper could be of interest to people from multiple fields of study. So in other words, you're telling the editor that the readership could be large, and therefore it's more likely to be cited. Dealing with referees. Now, referees will identify flaws, concerns. Treat this as good advice. Take it on board. This is really now all that stands between you and acceptance. So you really need to focus at this point. This is the point at which some people drop the ball. Prepare a detailed rebuttal letter. Number all the points and deal with all of them. List the changes made to the text and figures. Revise the manuscript in line with the rebuttal. Referees really like to see that you've taken time and effort to deal with their concerns. So make your response look like you put in real effort. So for example, you might include additional data. You might say, I went back. If it's a lab study, I went back into the lab. I did more experiments. If it's a sociology study, we went and reanalyzed our data, and we now include a separate table or something like that. But your rebuttal letter should really tell the referees you went to some effort. It shouldn't be kind of given the idea that you just ticked a few boxes. Okay, so it really is your way. You're in a dialogue now with the referees. So your rebuttal letter is part of that dialogue, and dialogue should be telling them that you've really taken on board everything they've said, and you respect what they've said. Don't give lame excuses. So they're not interested if your university doesn't have, I don't know, a particular journal and library or something like that, or a particular piece of equipment or a particular computer program. And that's not their problem, So don't give them those kinds of excuses. Give them valid reasons. It's sometimes a valid reason to say, for example, a postdoc researcher left during the study or something like that. But don't give them lame excuses, and be always respectful in the way you deal with them. Coping with rejection. It's hard for everyone. I get papers rejected all of the time. Learn from referees' comments and the process. Rewrite for a different journal, and this is where we come back to our publication pipeline. Do you need a different sales proposition? Do you need a different elevator pitch? Think about that. Take steps to develop a strategy to improve your success rate. So, in other words, rejection comes to all of us. Some people take rejection very much to heart, but you have to develop a kind of a thick skin and say, this is part of the process. If I can handle rejection well, I can turn it into a positive. Now, there are a number of things you can do to improve success. One of the most important pieces of advice I always give people is become a referee yourself. Nothing improves your chances in publication like being a referee. And the reason for this is that when you submit your referee's report on a piece, on a paper or whatever, an article, you usually will see the reports of other referees. And it's amazing, when you do this for a few years, 2 or 3 years, you will notice you internalize the referee process. You become your own referee. And just magically, you will notice that your success rate starts to increase, because you are now being rigorous with yourself in the way that referees are rigorous. And therefore, you will notice an improvement. Build an international network of collaborators. Write review articles if you have opportunities. And if you have ideas for review articles, most journals have a reviews editor. And you can just write an email to that editor and say, I have an idea for a review article. Here's what I think it could include. And this is a way that you can get invitations to write reviews. Writing reviews is very good for your CV. It says you're an expert in your field. And reviews are cited more often than research papers. Generally, reviews build up a lot of citations. A lesson I learned from one of my mentors was when my students write a PhD thesis, I regard the literature review or the introduction part of the thesis, I regard that as pretty much a review article. So we rewrite that always as a review article. And over time, you build up a number of review articles in this way, and these really add to your citations. Use open access journals. Again, you get more citations from open access journals than traditional ones. Discuss publication projects with mentors. Attend and present at conferences. And this is networking again, especially if they publish proceedings. And by the way, if you're at conferences, make it your business to, at coffee time, target some of the top speakers, go talk to them, have your business card ready, let them know who you are, and follow up later with an email when you return home. This is what I mean by building a network. You're not just at the conference just to be kind of passively sitting in the audience. Similarly, if you have an opportunity to ask questions or to engage in discussion or to chair sessions at the conference, these are gold dust. These are golden opportunities for you to put yourself out there in the public eye within your discipline. And this is what will really help you when your publication lands on someone's desk. Chances are they're in that very same conference hall. So these are little things you can do that will really help you. And you can suggest ideas for editing special issues of journals. Most journals are always on the lookout for special issue topics. Things to avoid: negative people. They don't help anyone. I am a good researcher, but I cannot write papers. That cannot be something that comes out of your mouth. Diverting energies to publishing too many other kinds of things. Really focus on anything that's going to be reviewed. All of us will have things like, published abstracts. We'll have things like book chapters, book reviews, etc., somewhere in our publication list. But in the end of the day, the real thing that helps your career is anything that's going to be cited. Avoid anything to do with predatory conferences, journals, and publishers. By the way, there is a listing called Beale's List, which You can find, if you Google search it, Beale's list, which is a listing of presumed predatory journals and publishers. But that it's a bit out of date now. But you know, there are a lot of them out there. So always, if I get an invitation that I'm interested in, I always do a real Google analysis, and I put in the word predatory with the name of the publisher. And if it comes back that it's a suspected predatory journal, that's it. I don't go. I wouldn't dream of going to a journal like that. Oh, the referees and editors are just prejudiced against me. You know, that's a common. I've said this myself, but in my time. But that's only just an excuse. It's not something that you should internalize into your system. Avoid poor production values. So that means text, for example, with lots of typos. It means bad grammar. It means poor images, sloppy cover or rebuttal letters. Until the article is sent to the journal, it's under your control. So while it's under your control the hell out of it. Do anything that is under your control while you have that level of control. Okay, so the text should be pristine. It should look very clean. The grammar should be perfect. Images should be crisp and clear and high quality. The cover letter and rebuttal letters should always be very well written and carefully edited before you send them in. All of this collectively will contribute to a greater success rate in publication. Now, I want to say a few words now about book publication. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I'll try. I'll try get through just some of this. This is just a brief. This is an assistant professor in Khalifa University in our Department of English, Dr. Leila Kuchukalik. I can never pronounce her name. I never get past Leila, so I always just call her Dr. Leila. And this is a book proposal that she sent to Routledge, and I mentored her in this, and I helped her with the proposal because it involves science, and in particular involves aspects of biochemistry. So we kind of worked on it together, and she was successful. She's got a contract from Routledge now for this book called Biofictions. So if you're going to ask a book publisher, for a contract, this is the kind of document you have to complete. The first thing to say is that you will be surprised at how much care and attention publishers put on the title. The title is really, really important, and they take an awful lot of notice of the title. So we sat and I passed this on to Leila, and we sat down and we thought through multiple kinds of titles for this book, and then we ended up with literary and biofictions, literary and visual imagination in the age of biotechnology. So you can see it's a kind of a rather catchy title. So there will be then a statement of aim, so you're asked to briefly and concisely state the main aim, themes, and objectives of the proposed book. Going back to the elevator pitch, again, you need to have yourself a clear idea what is the purpose of this book, what are the aims and objectives, and it's concise. You have only 200 words to do this. This is kind of the sections of the book. Then there are 3 main sections. So it's showing that it was organized. The abstract. An abstract is provided then, and again, remember, it should be complete and informative. Then you follow that with a table of contents, which lists each of the chapters with a kind of very brief bullet point description of what they will contain. In other words, you really have to convince the publisher that you have thought this through and that you have a very clear idea of the layout and the content and the scope of the book. They don't want you to come to them with a proposal for a 100-page book that turns into a 1,000-page book, a tome. Then there's chapter summaries. So these are brief little abstracts for each chapter. And again, this will be consistent with what I just showed you in terms of the overview of the content. Then you need to talk about the target market. Book publishers will want to know what competitor books are out there, who would use this book, what courses, for example, might it be recommended for, what journals might it be cited in, and most journals have a book editor. So you, by the way, in terms of building your reputation, this is one of the things that one piece of advice I was given by one of my mentors. I actually started to write to the book editors of journals, and they sent me books to review. So I wrote short reviews of these books. This is another kind of secret way of building your international profile and your name recognition. So the target market must be described quite in quite a level of detail. Organizations and institutes, journals that might be interested, courses that around the world that might use this book, and then a review of the main competing titles. When I published my textbook, this was one of the things I had to also do. I had to kind of describe what courses would use my textbook and what competing titles were, and I had to kind of delineate what the niche in the market was for my book, and that again was successful with the publisher Wiley's. And then you in this case she provided 2 sample chapters. You don't write the book and then go looking for a contract. Usually you write 1 or 2 chapters of the book and then you go looking for the contract. And then when you have the contract, you can kind of justify the extensive amount of time it will take to produce the other chapters to give you the complete book. And there will be some kind of a suggested publication date. And you notice she has then suggested academic referees. And she states this proposal has not been submitted elsewhere. It's considered bad etiquette to submit a proposal to multiple journals. Also, the same thing with peer-reviewed papers. You don't submit them to multiple journals. You do that sequentially, okay? So you can send a proposal to Routledge, and if they reject it, you can bring it to Wiley's. If they reject it, you can bring it to Springer, and so on. But you don't send it to 2 or 3 publishers at the same time. Okay, so that's really all I have to say for today's session. I hope you found at least some of what I had to say today interesting. It was great. I really enjoyed participating in this session, and I hope.
Yes, sir. There are 3 questions that are to be shared with you.
No problem.
With the participants, and we are just going to share the question on the screen.
Okay, the question is how to approach international ISC listed journals. These are the journals that are cited and that are listed in Scopus in particular. Now, it's different database. There are different databases of publications. For example, in medicine, there's a listing called PubMed. And this is like a sort of an abstracting service. So there are some journals that are listed in PubMed. Not all of them are listed in Scopus, and in turn, not all the ones listed in Scopus are listed in Web of Science and so on, or the Web of Knowledge, and so on. So really, you've got to go to these different databases and look for the journals in your field, in your discipline, that are the top rated ones. Now, my advice really is go to SciMago and look up Q1, and it will tell you, you can actually just produce a ranking. It'll actually just give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So that brings you to the journal, and then you can check, is that journal ISC listed? But most of them are. I know in a lot of humanities disciplines they're not, and there are sometimes other kinds of listings that you can use. For example, in business, there's the Australian Dean's List or something like that. So there's lots of different kinds of listing systems out there. Now, in your own discipline, most people have a pretty good idea of what are the top journals to publish in anyway. Okay, so this is again a case where you need to talk to your mentors, your international colleagues, try to find out like where do I find a listing of the best journals. There is also a listing, I forget the name of it now. There is actually a specific listing or description of all the top humanities journals that you can access. If you Google it, it'll come up, and it's a description of each journal. It's quite comprehensive. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, the impact factor of a journal is calculated in the following way. The journal takes over a 2-year window. The journal will have attracted a certain number of citations. These are counted, and they're divided by, that number is divided by the number of citable items, and that gives you a resulting number, which is called an impact factor. And the following year, that 2-year window moves on 1 year. So that's how it's done. And I can tell you, being on the editorial board of journals, every year we have to we have a big kind of meeting to look at what's happening with our impact factor. Is it going? We want to see it going up. Now, sometimes some years we'll get a dip, and then we start getting the message that we should be tougher on our refereeing or something like that. So the impact factor of the journal is just simply a calculation based on the number of citations it attracts in a window of time. So once a good research paper is rejected, well, I mean, you just take on board you have to just take on board the comments. And my advice is you go back into Q1 again and you find maybe the next ranked journal down. You look self-critically at the paper. Why wasn't it accepted? Perhaps it didn't match the research interests of the editorial board. That's often the case. You really have to kind of take on board the criticism. Why was it not accepted? I mean, I'm dealing at the moment with a really excellent paper. One of my young colleagues from Tunisia has written on plants, on nanoparticles in plants, and it's obvious to me that she just kept sending it to the wrong journal. It's really a matter of finding that journal to which the topic of the paper matches very closely, but then you edit the paper to make it look like it fits in that journal, and that's how you persuade the editorial board that paper is acceptable.
Okay, now we are just trying to concise this session because of the lack of time, and the best 3 questions are selected just to be discussed with the key speaker. Now I would like to invite Dr. Hafiz Muhammad Arif Nadvi just to honor his presence. Sir, you are requested to say a few words.
Sir, very, very good afternoon, sir. Ahlan wa sahlan, marhaba.
Shukran.
How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good. I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed this session.
Kullu tamam, 100%?
I don't know.
Because
I only have about 10 words of Arabic, but I use them every day.
being polyglot, I can speak Arabic as well.
Yeah, good man.
Okay. So
it's tricky in the UAE because everybody speaks English.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because multilingualism in the modern era works.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So again, sir, I'm here with a few humble words to appreciate the participation by all faculty development program family. Okay, definitely, sir, your participation and the faculty and participants' participation motivates the entire team of the Department of Languages, who are making their efforts to their best to make these sessions informative, sir. So, as you told you, we need to address this professional need to master the various aspects of communication skills. That is true, sir. It is for the faculty to stimulate in the field of communication and to stimulate the students intellectually and making them aware of the new world of words, mechanics of formal communication, writing unified and coherent paragraphs, using logic, electronic arguments, writing research paper, using and evaluating e-library, documenting sources, writing in the social sciences. So, this program has been designed to provide the participants with a comprehensive and practical overview of the communication process. Sir, your presentation is exceptional, thoughtful, and certainly it will result in an everlasting impression on the audience, sir. Very resourceful, sir. Thank you for sparing your precious time for us. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us and making this session memorable, historical, and informative. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much in turn. I'm really honored. I said at the beginning, in a way, I wish people had told me this 20, 30 years ago. But I think I'm passing on my knowledge to the younger generation in the hope
Sir,
that
we are all honored to have such a great personality among us.
Thank you.